Hello class, welcome back. I'm sure you've noticed that when we go to the login page and we log in, so let me say John 1 2 3 4 5 6, we indeed log in, and the proof is that we see the post that we upvoted and downvoted, but our navbar doesn't change and it still says login and sign up, of course. So the way we can fix this is we can set up a global context, which if you're not aware of that, I have a video on this channel about use context and context in general. It's basically a global component that wraps everything in your app, and it has a value, and that value can be anything. It can be a collection of objects or an arrays or whatever, and it is shared across all of your components, or at least all of the components that are under that provider that provides these values. And why it's useful is that you don't have to, for example, if you have, let's say this is a page and we have this is the navbar, and let's say, for example, this is a button, which is another component, and this button needed to access the state that is in the page needs to pass it to the navbar, and then the navbar needs to pass it to the button, which is called prop drilling. And of course, this is a really bad practice because it adds so much code. And when we have a context, this button can straight away access that context and ask for whatever piece of information that it needs, which is really efficient. So let's actually implement this. But before we do anything, I would like to ask you to like this video right now. It means a lot to me and it helps a lot. And if you haven't done so yet, please do make sure to subscribe. I would really love it if I would hit 20k subscribers before the end of the year. It would mean the world to me. Thanks. All right, let's go back to our code. So let's open up, let's actually open the Explorer, and make sure, by the way, you have both your server and client running. And let's go to actually in the client source, and actually here let's create a new folder. Let's call this context, and inside of here let's create a new file called auth.tsx, and this will hold our authentication context. So let's create this context. Let me close this. So I'm going to say const state context, and we're going to have two contexts, and I'll show you why this is useful. So to create a context, we need to use create context, and make sure to import this from React. And here we can pass it a default value, and actually we can pass it a type as well. And let's call this state, and let's actually create this. So here we can say interface state, and we're gonna store two things. So an authenticated, and this will be of type boolean, so if it's true or false, and also a user, and this will be of type user. And let's actually create a type user. So let's go to our types in the root directory, and here let's create, let's export another interface. So export interface user, and for the user we're gonna have a username, and this is a string, an email, and this is a string as well, created at, and that's a string, and an updated at, which is also a string. Save that. Let's go back to our auth. So here our user is of type user, so let's import that, or undefined, because at the beginning, or maybe if we're not logged in, it could be undefined. So now in our state context, it knows what state type is, and we can give it a default value. So we can give it a default value of authenticated of false, and a user of null. Let's do a comma here. Let's create another context. So this will be const dispatch context. Usually you have these both in one, but I'll link in the description a great post by Ken Dodds that explains the best way to use a context in your React app, and he will go more into details if you want to understand anything more about this approach, which I actually took from there. So here we can say create context, and this will take a null. Now we need to create a reducer as well, which tells the context what to do when we dispatch any of the actions that we're going to have in our app. And this takes a state, and this of type state that we just created, and it also takes an action, or actually we can destructure straight away from it, and every action has a type and a payload, or maybe it doesn't have a payload, that's optional. And let's give this actually a type as well, so action, and we can create this interface action, and we have a type of type string, payload, and I'm gonna give this a type of any, because it could be an object, it could be an array, it could be so many things, and it creates some problems when we check for it. So I'm just gonna skip type checking for the payload. So the reducer will be an arrow function, and it's going to switch on the type. So depending on the type, it's going to do different things, the type of action that is. And we're going to have a couple of cases. So the first case will be called login. And this, of course, is called when we log in. So what this will do, it will mutate the state, and it will spread the existing state. Now, of course, our state only has 2 variables, but this is a good practice in general. When your state grows, you always want to spread the state to not mutate the rest of the fields that you don't want to actually modify. So what happens when we log in? Our authenticated becomes true because we're now logged in, and we need to set user data, which is in the payload that we are receiving. So we'll say user payload, and we're gonna have another case, so case, and let's call this logout, all uppercase, no pun intended. And here we'll return, let's spread the state, and we're gonna make the authenticated false, and we're gonna make the user null, essentially reverting back to the default state. And here let's actually add a default case. So default case here, we can throw an error. So let's throw new error. So this, when we dispatch an action, which is none of these, which is a bad practice. You shouldn't, this is your code. You should know what you're dispatching. But in case you make a typo, this will happen, and it will throw an error, and you will see it. And this will say unknown action type colon, and then we can concatenate the type. Actually, we can't do that. This is not console log. So let's do backticks here, and then here do $ curly brace and concatenate the type, the action type. So that's our reducer done. Let's actually create the auth context provider itself. So here actually this needs to be exported because we're going to need it. So let's say export const auth provider equals, and this will be a regular component, and it will take some props, and we're gonna take the children prop from it, and we can give this a type as well. We can say children, and this will be of type react.react node. Let's do our arrow function. First thing we need to do, we need to call the user reducer hook. So we're gonna array destructure the a state that we're gonna pass down, and a dispatch equals use reducer, and let's import that from React. And we're going to use the reducer that we just created earlier, and we need to pass it an initial state. So the initial state will be a user of null and authenticated of false. So now let's return, let me scroll down. We're going to return the dispatch context dot provider, and we're going to pass it the value, the dispatch itself. So dispatch, and inside of there we're gonna pass the state context, the provider as well. So dot provider, and this will have a value, and this will be the state itself. And inside of here we'll have our children, and this will be whatever we throw in there, and this will be used in the app TSX. And here I'm going to create 2 hooks and export them. So we'll say export const use auth state, and this will be a function, and it will return use context, and import that and pass it state context, and repeat this, and this will be use auth dispatch. So replace this with dispatch, and this will use the context of the auth, not auth, or is it dispatch context? What did I call it? Yeah, dispatch context. So pass it dispatch context like that. All right, let's save this. Now let's go to our app TSX, so app TSX, and here let's import that context. So import from, go back 1 level to context / auth, and here let's import the use, actually no, let's import the auth provider itself. So auth provider, and now instead of this fragment, we can wrap our whole app with auth provider, and we don't need fragments, so let's remove that import and save. Now if we go back to our app, nothing changes because we're not calling this context. We can open our DevTools. Of course, make sure you have the React DevTools and go to components, and we can see that it added this auth provider and these 2 context providers under. So the way we can use this is we need to, when we go to login and we log in from here, we need to call the login action and pass the login, the user data that we receive from the server, so that our context will store it in the context, in the auth context, so that we can access it. So let's do that. Let's go to the login page. So scroll down right here where we log in the user when we submit the form. So here, when we send this request to log in the user, let's get that data from it. So we'll say const res equals await post to the login route. So when that's successful, we're going to use the dispatch. We need to import use auth dispatch. So up here, let's import from back one level context / auth. We need to import use auth dispatch. And again, autocomplete use. Yeah, there we go. Auth dispatch. And here we can say const dispatch, because it's a hook, we need to call it to get to that dispatch function from the value. Remember, if you go back, you'll see, so this is our provider. It provides a value, and that value is just this one dispatch function. So the advantage of using these two providers is that instead of like destructuring from it, you can just get it like this, and it's like separates the concerns, and it makes kind of more sense. And also it saves us from like nested destructuring, which sometimes you have to deal with. All right, so now we have that dispatch. We can come down here and say dispatch, and we need to dispatch an action of type login, and the payload will be the res.data that we get from this request. And of course, when that's done, let's push router push to the home page like we did before. So save that, and now let's go back to our app. Let's make sure, so let's go in the components, go to context provider. So the inner one, so the outer one is the one that provides the dispatch, and the inner one is the one that provides the state, the auth state. And here we see, of course, we're authenticated as false and user is null. So now when we log in, it should populate those. So 1 through 6, enter. Cool. So we get authenticated is true, and the user is the user data of John. So that's working properly. All right, so now let's get the navbar to update, because now we have this in the context. The navbar needs to access the context and see if we're logged in, then it should show different buttons up here. And by the way, if you're getting any value or learning something new, or at least being entertained by this video, please do make sure to like this video. It means a lot to me. Thanks. All right, so let's go to our navbar. So navbar. So here we need to import the context as well, or the use state hook actually. So use auth state. Actually, we need both. So let's say use auth dispatch as well from back one level context / auth. So here, actually, let's turn this into a code block. So turn this into curly braces. And this is a closing curly brace. And here we'll say return. So here, let's get the authenticated. So say const and destructure authenticated from, so equals use auth state like this. And if you had both the state and the dispatch in the auth state, you'd have to do something like this. So you'd have the state, and then here you'll destructure the authenticated. So this saves us from constant nested destructuring. So let's revert those changes. So here we have authenticated. So down inside of here, so where we have the auth buttons, we can check for authentication status. So let's do a curly braces, do an expression and say authenticated, and do a ternary operator. So if that's the case, then we need to show logout button if we're logged in. Else, oops, so here put colon, else, then we just need to move this block. Oops, this block, move it in there. And this is a problem because this needs to be a single child. So here, let's actually wrap it in a fragment, and make sure to import this. Okay, why do I not get suggestions? Okay, let me just import it manually. So import from React, fragment. So let's go down. Let's close this fragment tag. Fragment, can we spell that? Fragment. Okay, why am I getting squigglies? Okay, because I'm not returning anything here. Okay, let's do a logout button. So here, let's say button with a class name. And this will be exactly the same as the login button, the hollow. So let's just copy these classes and paste them here. And this button will say logout. And actually, because it's a button, not a link, we need to have a onClick. So here, let's say onClick. And let's give it a logout function, which let's create now. So let's go back up here. So the logout will have a function. So const logout equals, it's just going to be a function that calls the logout endpoint. So let's say axios .get, make sure to import axios. So we're going to send a get request to /auth/logout. which just, as you remember, just creates a new cookie, an expired cookie, and empties it. So it kind of like gets rid of the cookie, the auth cookie. And here we'll say .then. We don't need the result, so we'll just do an empty arguments, and then we need the dispatch. So let's say const dispatch equals use auth dispatch, and here we'll dispatch the logout type. So dispatch type logout, and after that we'll say we'll reload the entire page. So we'll say window.location location.reload. This saves us from the hassle of like kind of changing state and like refetching posts and stuff like this. We simply just reload the page. So we'll say, I know a lot of people don't like when I reload the page on a single page application, but trust me, a lot of like Facebook, like Reddit, all these pages, they reload your page all the time. It's just that sometimes it's really fast and you're just not aware of it. Not in the case of Reddit. Reddit has been a really slow mess recently. I don't know why. All right, so let's actually catch the error as well. So if we get an error, we're just gonna console log it for development. So save that, and now we should see some changes if I can talk. Cool. So we already see a logout button because we have a user in our state. So now if we press it, it should empty this user. So press it. Cool. So it empties the user context. We don't have a user anymore. Of course, we don't have a cookie. If we go to application cookies, there you go. The cookie is gone because we we just sent a new one. I keep forgetting. We sent a new one that is expired and we emptied the context. So now we get the login and sign up buttons again. So let's log in, and now we should encounter a different problem. Actually, we don't. Okay, how do we encounter it? Yes, we encounter it by refreshing. So when you visit the page from just a different place, so you just like reload the page or go to a different one, you get these buttons because the context is empty. So let's make a way so that our application on load because we have a cookie right now, technically we are logged in. So we just need to make a way so that our app, once you load the first time, takes the cookie and then fetches user information even if you don't log in. Because right now we don't have any user information inside the app itself. We just have this token cookie. So let's go back to our auth context. This. I have too many windows open. Let me close this. Actually, I'm just going to close everything. So inside of our provider, actually, we can do a use effect call. So import use effect and then do a callback. And here we can fetch the user data. We can say Axios and import that .get /auth/me. And here we'll say .then. By the way, you might be wondering, why am I using .then instead of using async await? In use effect, you can't do an async callback, or maybe you can, but it complains at you. The other approach is that, actually, let me show you the other approach, even though you should maintain the same approach across an app, but I just want to show you the other approach just for reference. So the other approach, you can do something like this. So async function, and you can call it load user or whatever. And here you do the function, and here we'll say try, and we'll say const res equals await axios dot get /auth/me. And when we get the data, we'll dispatch a login. It's as if we logged in, and we'll say type. Actually, I'm gonna do a different thing. I'm gonna create a custom dispatch because I'm sick of like sending I'm sick of sending an entire object. It's too much. The syntax is too long sometimes. So I can do like a tweak here. Let's actually call this. Let's call this default dispatch, and we can just create a const dispatch equals, and this will be a function that takes a type, which is a string, and a payload, which is of type any. Actually, the payload is optional, so let's do a question mark here. And then what it does is it simply just calls the default dispatch that we just renamed, and it would just pass an object with a type and a payload of the same that we passed. And now this saves us the hassle of passing an object. We can just say dispatch and just say login and just pass the res.data like that. It's way cleaner like this, in my opinion. And we pass the dispatch, so let's actually change where we use the dispatch to this new syntax, which are just two places. So the login So here we have dispatch. So here we can just pass them as arguments. So the first is login and the second is just res.data like this. I think this syntax is a bit cleaner. Maybe for a beginner it would be confusing, but you can just check back. I mean, you wrote it, so it shouldn't be confusing. So let's go to Navbar. And here, do we use dispatch here? Yeah, we do. So here we can just, actually this is even much cleaner. So like that, dispatch logout. Cool. If we use it somewhere else, it's going to come up as an error. So we load the user, we get the user, and then we dispatch login with that data. And let's do a catch if we get an error. We're just going to console log it. And with this syntax, what you do, so you declare the function and then you just call it. So load user like that. And of course, pass an empty array of dependencies to use effect because we want this to execute only once at the beginning. Now, this syntax, I think, in my opinion, is a bit longer, but I'll just keep it here for reference. So save. And now if we go back to our app, there we go. You already see that we have logout. And if we refresh again, I know for a brief second we see login and logout, or like login and sign up. This is a bit exaggerated by the fact that we are in development and it's a bit slower. In production, you're going to build your pages. They're not static, but you're going to build, like, the JavaScript is going to be all minified and everything is going to be much faster than in development, because in development there's a lot of stuff as well going on. I think, let me think. Okay, we can create a solution for this. All right. Yeah, okay. So here in the auth, I didn't do this initially, but let's just go with it. So here, actually, we can add a loading variable, which is a boolean. And here where we create the context, we can say loading. Actually, I'm going to have it by default true, because it should always start with loading at the beginning. And in the default initial state, we'll say loading, set it to true. So basically, when we're fetching the user, I want to set the loading to true, so that the navbar will be like, okay, if the login is true, then don't show any buttons until we're done logging in, or like loading, if the loading is true. Yeah, set don't show any buttons, and if it's false, that means we're done loading. Check if we're authenticated, show these buttons, otherwise show these. So it's not going to show any buttons until that's done. So let's go to the navbar. So here, we get the state, let's get as well the loading. So let's scroll down. So actually here, I don't want to show anything for loading. So we can wrap this entire thing and say if loading and wrap this entire thing in parentheses. So if we're loading, check, and then run. Actually, no, if we're not loading, this is always confusing. If we're not loading, when we're done loading, then check if we're authenticated, show the logout, otherwise show these. So let's save, and let's save this as well. And let's look at our app, refresh, and we don't get any buttons at all. Okay, because I'm a dummy, I forgot to change the loading, because like this is going to be always true. So what we can do, we can either, when we log in, set it to false, and also when we log out, but we can create as well another case for it. So here I'll add another case and call this stop_loading, all in caps, of course. And here we'll, what did I tap? Return, oops, can't type, return, spread the state, and say loading, set to false. And we can call this once we're done logging in. So actually we need to call it in both when we are successful and unsuccessful. So we can just use finally, which will execute after either one. And we'll say dispatch, and we'll dispatch stop loading. So save. Now refresh. Cool. So we get no buttons until we get logout, because it knows that we're logged in. And if I log out, I refresh, same thing happens. We don't get any buttons until we get login and sign up. Sweet. Before I close off this video, there's this little issue that I want to address, is that if you go to the login page, wait, am I logged in? Okay, let's log in. Okay, let me demonstrate this properly. So when we're logged in and we go to the login page, we're still able to access it, which kind of doesn't make sense. So if we're logged in, it should, when we get here, it should redirect us to the home page. So we can simply fix that by, let's go to the login. We can get the authenticated. So let's get use or auth state. And here we can destructure, so const authenticated equals use auth auth state. And here we can simply say if, in a new line, if authenticated, then simply router dot push just slash to the home page. And let's do this for the register as well. So I'm just going to copy this line, go to register, and underneath here do that, and import the use auth state hook, and here do the same. If authenticated, then router dot push the slash. So save both, and now if we go back, there you go. You saw that if we go to slash login, it shows the login page briefly, and then it goes to the home page, and same happens to register. We can actually do a different type of, we can do server side, check the cookie and send it, and if the user is logged in, you don't even show this page, you immediately redirect. But I think this is okay because, you know, like, it's not like the login page is some very secret information that they shouldn't see. It's okay if they see it for a brief second. And also, like I said earlier, once you build your app, your files will be much tinier, is that a word? Much smaller. And Next will not be running so many things, so it'll be so much faster. You'll just see that page for like a fraction of a second. That's it for this video. Make sure to click the like button, click the subscribe if you haven't, click the comment, send a comment, click all the buttons, watch all of my videos, and watch all of the other coding videos. Become like the ultimate coding galaxy brain. Alright, that's it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.